Ladies and gentlemen, stop everything you are doing right now because what I am about to tell you is going to absolutely blow your mind. And I am not exaggerating when I say this could reshape the entire North American economy as we know it. Canada, our neighbor to the north, the country that shares the longest undefended border in the world with us, the country that is the #1 export destination for 36 American states, the country that sends us 60% of our crude oil imports and 85% of our electricity imports, that country just looked the president of the United States dead in the eye and said, no, we are not backing down. We are going forward with our trade deal with China, and there is nothing you can do about it. Now, before we get into all the jaw dropping details, and believe me, there are layers upon layers to this story, if you find this kind of real breaking news valuable, I need you to do me one favor. Smash that subscribe button right now and hit the bell icon because stories like this are moving fast and you do not want to miss a single update. We are covering this in real time. All right, so let me take you back to where this whole thing started because the timeline here is absolutely wild and it shows you just how fast things are shifting on the world stage. On January 16th, 2026, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, and I want you to remember that name because this man has become one of the most consequential leaders on the global stage right now. Mark Carney flew to Beijing, China. According to the official release from the Prime Minister of Canada's office dated January 16th, this was the first visit by a Canadian Prime Minister to China since 2017. Let that sink in. Let that nearly a decade of frozen relations between Canada and China, and Carney broke that ice in spectacular fashion. According to NBC News reporting from January 16th, Carney met directly with Chinese President Xi Jinping at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing, and together they announced what Carney called a new strategic partnership between Canada and China. Now, what does this deal actually include? According to the official Canadian government backgrounder released on January 16th, here are the hard facts. China agreed to lower tariffs on Canadian canola seed from a combined rate of approximately 84% down to approximately 15% by March 1st, 2026. Folks, Canada exports roughly $4 billion worth of canola seed to China annually, so this is massive for Canadian farmers. On top of that, China agreed to remove anti-discrimination tariffs on Canadian canola meal, lobsters, crabs, and peas from March 1st, 2026 through at least the end of the year, which according to the Canadian government would unlock nearly $3 billion in export orders for Canadian workers and businesses. And here is the part that really got Washington's attention. In exchange, Canada agreed to reduce its 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles down to a most favored nation rate of just 6.1% on the first 49,000 vehicles, with that number growing to 70,000 over 5 years, according to CNBC's reporting from January 26. But wait, it gets even more interesting. According to the sourcing analysis website et2c.com from January 20th, Chinese manufacturers would be required to establish joint venture manufacturing plants on Canadian soil within 3 fiscal years to maintain that lower tariff rate, meaning China is not just selling cars to Canada, they are building factories there. Now, here is where the story takes a dramatic turn that honestly reads like a political thriller. According to CNBC's report from January 24th, just 1 week before Trump exploded over this deal, he was actually fine with it. On January 16th, the same day the deal was announced, reporters asked Trump at the White House whether he was worried about the growing closeness between China and Canada. His response, and this was reported by multiple outlets, including ABC News and the Washington Post, was, quote, "That is what he should be doing. It is a good thing for him to sign a trade deal. If you can get a deal with China, you should do that." He literally said it was a good thing. Then everything changed. According to Al Jazeera's reporting from January 24th, Carney delivered what many observers called a historic speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. In that speech, Carney declared that the world was experiencing a rupture, not a transition, and he urged the world's middle powers to band together to resist economic coercion from superpowers. He did not name the United States specifically, But according to multiple reports from CNN, NPR, and Euronews, everyone in that room knew exactly who he was talking about. According to the Washington Post's reporting, Carney received a standing ovation in Davos. Trump was furious. According to CNN's reporting from January 24th, Trump fired back by saying that Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements. And then the hammer dropped. On Saturday, January 24th, 2026, according to reporting from literally every major news outlet, CNBC, CNN, NPR, ABC News, Al Jazeera, The Washington Post, NBC News, and more, Trump posted on Truth Social threatening a 100% tariff on all Canadian goods and products coming into the United States if Canada makes a deal with China. His exact framing, as reported by multiple sources, accused Carney of trying to make Canada a drop-off port for China to send goods into America. He also mockingly referred to Prime Minister Carney as Governor Carney, which is a deliberate insult he has used before, playing off his repeated suggestion that Canada should become the 51st state. According to S&P Global's reporting from January 26, Trump also wrote that China will eat Canada alive, completely devour it, including the destruction of their businesses, social fabric, and general way of life. Now, here is what makes this so absolutely stunning and why I am calling this a backfire. Carney did not flinch. He did not back down. He did not cave. According to CNBC's report from January 26th, Carney told reporters that Canada has no intention of pursuing a free trade deal with China, carefully distinguishing between the limited preliminary agreement they reached and a full free trade agreement. He said, "What we have done with China is to rectify some issues that have developed in the last couple of years." And he added that the deal was entirely consistent with CUSMA, which is the Canadian name for the USMCA trade agreement. But here is the key thing, and this is what I really need you to understand, because this is where the backfire really comes into focus. Canada did not cancel the deal. The tariff reductions went into effect on March 1st, 2026, exactly as planned. Chinese tariffs on Canadian canola seed dropped from 84% to 15%. The anti-discrimination tariffs on Canadian agricultural products were removed. The Chinese EV quota system was implemented. Canada went forward with everything. And here is where it gets even more interesting for us as Americans. According to CNN's reporting, trade experts were already skeptical that Trump would follow through on the 100% tariff threat. CNN quoted a phenomenon that investors had dubbed TACO, which stands for Trump always chickens out, referring to the pattern of aggressive tariff threats followed by walkbacks. And that assessment proved prophetic because of what happened next. According to the Tax Foundation's comprehensive tariff tracker, on January 31st, Trump escalated his rhetoric even further, threatening to increase tariffs on Canada to 50% and impose additional tariffs on Canadian aircraft if Canada pursued a trade deal with China. But he did not follow through on the 100% threat. And then came the real earthquake. On February 20th, 2026, the United States Supreme Court, in a landmark 6-3 decision in the case Learning Resources Inc. v. Trump, ruled that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, known as IEEPA, does not authorize the president to impose tariffs. According to SCOTUS Blog's reporting, Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the majority opinion, joined by Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, Gorsuch, Barrett, and Jackson. The court found that the power to impose tariffs is a branch of the taxing power reserved for Congress. According to the Penn-Wharton budget model, an estimated $175 billion in IEEPA tariff collections could potentially be refunded to importers. The Holland and Knight law firm's analysis noted that within hours of the Supreme Court decision, Trump signed a new executive order imposing a 10% tariff on goods from all countries under Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974, and the very next day, he announced he would increase it to 15%, which is the maximum allowed under that law. But here is the critical difference. According to the Tax Foundation's analysis, Section 122 tariffs are temporary, limited to 150 days, and require congressional approval for extension. And for most countries, 15% is a massive reduction from what was in place under IEEPA, particularly for Canada, which had been facing 35% tariffs. So let me break down why this matters so much for you, for me, for every American watching this right now. Canada is not some distant country we barely trade with. According to NPR's reporting, nearly 3.6 billion Canadian dollars worth of goods and services, that is about 2.7 billion US dollars, cross the US-Canada border every single day. Canada is the top export destination for 36 American states. About 60% of U.S. crude oil imports come from Canada. 85% of our electricity imports come from Canada. Canada is the largest foreign supplier of steel, aluminum, and uranium to the United States. According to S&P Global, Canada supplies about two-thirds of all primary aluminum consumed by the United States. When you threaten 100% tariffs on Canada, you are not just punishing Canada, you are punishing American manufacturers, American consumers, and American businesses that depend on Canadian raw materials every single day. And now Canada, feeling pushed away by Washington's aggressive tactics, is actively diversifying its trade partnerships. According to the Center for American Progress Analysis from February 13th, the Canada-China deal is a direct consequence of the Trump administration's trade policy. They wrote that as a result of the brazen tariff threats and toxic nationalism, Canada has come to view the United States not as a partner or ally, but as a belligerent nation that no longer shares its interests and values. The analysis specifically pointed out that allowing Chinese EVs into the Canadian market will place massive pressure on American automakers to catch up technologically. According to TD Economics Analysis, Canada set a goal of increasing exports to China by 50% by 2030 as part of this new strategic partnership. And the USMCA, the trilateral trade agreement between the US, Canada, and Mexico, is up for review in summer 2026, which, according to the International Bar Association's analysis, could make the situation even more volatile. Now, let me take a step back and explain something that I think a lot of people are missing about this entire situation because the media is not giving you the full context. When we talk about Trump threatening 100% tariffs on Canada, we need to understand what that would actually mean in practical terms for ordinary Americans, not just in theory, but in your real everyday life. Think about this. You wake up in the morning, you turn on the lights. There is an 85% chance that electricity is flowing into your home thanks to Canadian power imports. You drive to work, the gas in your tank has a 60% chance of being refined from Canadian crude oil. The steel in your car, the aluminum in your appliances, the lumber in your house, so much of it comes from Canada. According to S&P Global's detailed analysis, Canada supplies about two-thirds of all primary aluminum consumed by the United States. The Midwest aluminum premium had already broken through the $1 per pound barrier by January 23, 2026, and that price had quadrupled over the course of 2025 due to existing tariffs. Now imagine what would happen if you slapped 100% on top of that. The ripple effects through American manufacturing would be devastating. Auto manufacturers, construction companies, beverage companies that use aluminum cans, aerospace firms, all of them would face skyrocketing costs that would ultimately be passed on to you, the consumer. And it is not just raw materials. According to the data, Canada is America's second largest trading partner overall. We are talking about a trade relationship worth over $2.7 billion per day. Per day. That is not an annual figure. That is every single 24 hours. Now, let me also address the elephant in the room that I know a lot of you are thinking about, and that is the question of whether China is actually using Canada as a backdoor to get goods into the United States. This was Trump's central accusation, that Carney was making Canada a drop-off port for Chinese products. But here is what the actual trade experts are saying. According to CNN's reporting, Inu Manak, who is a senior fellow for international trade at the Council on Foreign Relations, one of the most respected policy think tanks in the world, pointed out that the structure of the Canada-China deal includes specific safeguards against this exact concern. The Chinese EV quota is capped at 49,000 vehicles initially, which, according to TD Economics, represents just 3% of total Canadian auto sales. And the joint venture manufacturing requirement means Chinese companies have to build factories on Canadian soil and create Canadian jobs to maintain the lower tariff rate. This is not a backdoor scheme. This is standard trade diversification that any sovereign nation would pursue when its primary trading partner is threatening to destroy the economic relationship. Now, let me tell you about the USMCA angle, because this is where things get really legally complicated and politically explosive. The USMCA, which Trump himself negotiated in his first term, actually has a provision that allows countries to terminate the agreement if one of the member nations enters into a free trade agreement with a non-market economy like China. But here is the catch, and this is a critical detail that changes everything. What Canada did with China is not a free trade agreement. It is a limited, targeted preliminary arrangement on specific products. Carney was very deliberate in making this distinction. According to CBC News, Canadian Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc confirmed that what was achieved is a resolution on several important tariff issues, not a comprehensive free trade deal. And here is another thing that the media largely overlooked. According to a Concordia University economics professor quoted by CBC News, the fact that the Canadian government chose to frame this as a limited arrangement rather than a free trade deal was strategically brilliant because it gave them full legal cover under the USMCA while still achieving meaningful trade diversification. Now, I want to be really clear about something because I know some of you are going to ask. The Council on Foreign Relations senior fellow Inu Manak told CNN that if Trump claims Canada violated the USMCA through its agreement with China, it might put America's own trade deals with China under similar scrutiny, including the U.S. soybean deal. Think about that for a second. The United States itself has active trade arrangements with China. If the standard is that you cannot have any trade deal with China without facing punishment, then the U.S. would be holding itself to a standard it does not follow. According to Fox Business reporting from January 26th, even Shark Tank star Kevin O'Leary, who is Canadian himself and generally supportive of Trump's trade policies, warned that China is the economic and military and AI enemy to both Canada and the United States. But he also acknowledged that the U.S.-Canada trade relationship is so deeply interconnected that extreme tariffs would be mutually destructive. And let me tell you about the Supreme Court ruling, because this is honestly the part of the story that should be getting 10 times more attention than it is. The February 20th, 2026 ruling in Learning Resources Inc. v. Trump was not just a minor legal setback for the administration. According to the ropes and gray legal analysis, it was described as a landmark decision that represents a significant check on executive authority. The Penn-Wharton budget model estimated that IEEPA tariff collections totaled approximately $175 billion, and those funds could potentially be subject to refunds. That is more than the combined annual spending of the Department of Transportation and the Department of Justice. According to the Wikipedia article on the case, which compiled reporting from multiple sources, by the day after the Supreme Court ruling, Trump had already imposed new global tariffs under Section 122, but these are capped at 15% maximum and limited to 150 days. Compare that to the tariffs that were in place before. Canada was facing 35%. China was facing tariff rates as high as 45% on certain goods. The new 15% rate is a dramatic reduction. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent stated that combining Section 122, Section 232, and Section 301 tariffs would result in virtually unchanged tariff revenue, but independent analysts dispute that claim. According to the Yale Budget Lab's analysis, post-Supreme Court tariff policy represents the equivalent of a 6.7 percentage point increase in the average effective tariff rate, which is roughly half of what it was under the full IEEPA regime. The bottom line is that the president's tariff toolkit has been significantly constrained by the Supreme Court, and that changes the entire calculus of threats like the 100% tariff on Canada. According to a Concordia University economics professor quoted by CBC News, Trump's unpredictable behavior is actually pushing Canada to secure other options, which gives Canada more leverage in the upcoming USMCA renegotiations. And according to Fox Business reporting from January 26th, even Shark Tank star Kevin O'Leary, who is Canadian himself, warned that China has historically taken advantage of its trade partners, but even he acknowledged that the deep interconnection between US and Canadian trade makes 100% tariffs essentially unworkable. Now, let me talk about something that is getting almost zero coverage, but is incredibly important for American workers specifically. The Center for American Progress published a detailed analysis on February 13th about what the Canada China deal means for the U.S. auto industry, and their conclusions are alarming. They pointed out that legacy North American automakers lag significantly behind their Chinese counterparts in the maturity of their EV production processes. By allowing Chinese investment and joint ventures on Canadian soil, Canada is essentially getting a technology transfer that will allow Canadian workers to learn from the most advanced EV manufacturers in the world. Meanwhile, what is happening in the United States? The Trump administration has been systematically dismantling EV incentives and subsidies. The analysis specifically stated that the Trump administration's wrecking ball approach to traditional forms of international cooperation and its destruction of the U.S. EV supply chain has forced Canada to change its strategy. In other words, we pushed Canada away, and now they are getting the technology and investment that could have come to American factories and American workers. The average price of an entry-level EV in Canada is expected to drop by 12 to 15,000 Canadian dollars as a result of this deal, making clean vehicles accessible to ordinary Canadian families while American consumers continue to face higher prices. And there is another dimension to this that I want you to think about very carefully. According to the International Bar Association's analysis, Trump's tariffs and the unpredictability with which they may be imposed and rescinded have caused huge uncertainty for Canadian businesses. That uncertainty is precisely what drives trade diversification. When businesses cannot predict whether they will face 25% tariffs, 35% tariffs, 50% tariffs, or 100% tariffs from one week to the next, they start looking for more stable trading partners. And that is exactly what China is offering Canada right now: stability and predictability in their trade relationship, which is ironic because that used to be what the United States offered the world. We used to be the country that everyone wanted to trade with because we were reliable, we were consistent, we honored our agreements. And now our closest neighbor is going to Beijing because they feel they cannot count on Washington. That should give every American pause, regardless of your political affiliation. Now, folks, if you have stayed with me this far, first of all, thank you. And second of all, I need you to really think about what this means for the bigger picture. We are watching a fundamental realignment of North American trade relationships happening in real time. Our closest ally and biggest trading partner is actively building new economic bridges with our greatest economic competitor because they feel they can no longer rely on us. The Supreme Court just stripped a major tariff tool from the president's arsenal. The USMCA is up for review this summer, and the entire global trading system is in flux. According to the Yale Budget Lab's analysis, the current tariff regime represents an average tax increase per U.S. household of roughly $700. And before the Supreme Court ruling, the Tax Foundation estimated it was closer to $1,500 per household. This is not abstract policy debate. This is money coming out of your wallet and mine. The question now is what happens next? Will Congress step in to authorize new tariff authority? Will the USMCA review become a battleground? Will more countries follow Canada's lead in diversifying away from U.S. trade dependence? These are the questions that will define the economic landscape for years to come. And I promise you, we are going to be covering every single development right here on this channel. That is why I need you. If you have not already done it, subscribe right now. Turn on notifications because the next few months are going to be absolutely critical and you need to be informed. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying informed, and I will see you in the next one.